Rebecca Chen's office was located in a glass tower in central London. Marcus had never been in such an expensive building before. The elevator moved silently to the 20th floor, where polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers created an atmosphere of serious wealth and power. Marcus carried his briefcase like it contained explosives. In a way, it did. The evidence inside could destroy reputations and careers and send people to prison. His hands were sweaty despite the cool air conditioning. Rebecca Chen was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. Her office walls were covered with newspaper clippings from famous cases she had won. Politicians, business executives, and celebrities had all fallen to her legal skills. "Mr. Thompson," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "please sit down and tell me everything." For the next 3 hours, Marcus laid out his case. He played the audio recordings, showed photographs of suspicious documents, and explained the complex web of financial transfers he had discovered. Rebecca listened without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad. When Marcus finished, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and studied him carefully. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "If what you're telling me is true, we're looking at one of the largest charity fraud cases in British history. But Mr. Thompson, you understand what you're up against? The royal family has unlimited resources. They have the best lawyers money can buy. They have political connections that reach the highest levels of government." Marcus nodded. "I know, but I can't let them keep stealing from sick children and homeless animals." "It's wrong," Rebecca smiled for the first time. "Good, I was hoping you'd say that. Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. I'm talking about a £100 million lawsuit. Full public disclosure, media coverage, parliamentary investigations. The works." Marcus felt dizzy. £100 million was more money than he could imagine. "Is that realistic?" "Based on your evidence, it's conservative," Rebecca said. "But Mr. Thompson, before we proceed, I need you to understand something. Once we file this lawsuit, your life will change forever. The media will follow you everywhere. Your family will be under constant scrutiny. You'll probably lose your job immediately. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus thought about Emma and Sarah. He thought about the sick children who needed charity money for medical treatment. He thought about the homeless people who depended on charity kitchens for their next meal. "Yes," he said. "I'm prepared." Rebecca began working immediately. She assembled a team of investigators, accountants, and legal researchers. Within days, they had confirmed much of Marcus's evidence and discovered even more corruption than he had suspected. The charity fraud went back 5 years. Multiple organizations were involved. Money had been stolen not just by Camilla, but by several other royal staff members who had followed her lead. The total amount was staggering. Meanwhile, Marcus continued working at the palace, pretending everything was normal. It was the hardest acting job of his life. Every morning he put on his uniform and stood guard outside the offices of people he was about to sue for massive amounts of money. Camilla seemed unaware that anything had changed. She continued her daily routine of meetings, phone calls, and charity events. The irony was painful for Marcus to watch. She would attend fundraising dinners, making speeches about helping the less fortunate, while millions of pounds meant for those same people sat in her private accounts. 1 week before the lawsuit was scheduled to be filed, Marcus had a close call that nearly exposed everything. He was standing outside Camilla's office when her personal secretary came rushing out. "Marcus," the secretary said urgently, "Her Royal Highness needs to see you immediately." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Had they discovered his investigation? Did they know about the lawsuit? He followed the secretary into Camilla's office, trying to keep his expression neutral. Camilla was sitting behind her desk, looking serious but not angry. Relief flooded through Marcus when he realized this wasn't about his investigation. "Marcus," Camilla said, "I have a special assignment for you. Next week I'm hosting a private meeting with some international charity directors. Very sensitive discussions about future funding. I need you to personally ensure that no one disturbs us. No interruptions, no visitors, no phone calls. Can I count on you?" Marcus nodded professionally. "Of course, Your Royal Highness." Complete privacy. After leaving her office, Marcus immediately called Rebecca Chen. The timing was perfect. Camilla's sensitive meeting was clearly another planning session for moving stolen money. If they filed the lawsuit before that meeting, they could prevent millions more pounds from disappearing. "We move tomorrow," Rebecca decided. I'll file the papers first thing in the morning. By noon, this will be front-page news across the country. That evening, Marcus went home and told Sarah what was about to happen. They sat Emma down and explained that their lives were going to change dramatically. Emma was old enough to understand that her father was doing something important and brave, even if she couldn't grasp all the details. "Will Daddy go to jail?" Emma asked innocently. "No, sweetheart," Sarah said, hugging her tight. "Daddy is one of the good guys. He's helping people who can't help themselves." Marcus barely slept that night. He kept checking his phone, expecting angry calls from palace security or threatening messages from royal lawyers. But everything remained quiet until morning. At 8 o'clock sharp, Rebecca Chen walked into the High Court in London and filed a lawsuit that would shake the British establishment to its core. The legal papers accused Camilla and several palace staff members of stealing over £100 million from registered charities. The lawsuit demanded full repayment plus damages and called for criminal investigations. Marcus was at his post in the palace when the news broke. He watched Camilla's secretary rushing in and out of her office, making frantic phone calls. Within an hour, palace lawyers were arriving for emergency meetings. The controlled, quiet atmosphere of the royal household dissolved into barely controlled panic. At 10:30, Camilla herself emerged from her office. She looked directly at Marcus, and for a moment their eyes met. Her expression was cold and calculating, but Marcus thought he detected something else underneath. Fear. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I won't be needing security today. You're dismissed." As Marcus walked away from his post for the last time, he felt a mixture of relief and terror. After 15 years of loyal service, his career was over. But his real work was just beginning. The lawsuit had been filed. The evidence was public. Now came the hardest part of all, proving his case against the most powerful family in Britain. Rebecca Chen's office was located in a glass tower in central London. Marcus had never been in such an expensive building before. The elevator moved silently to the 20th floor, where polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers created an atmosphere of serious wealth and power. Marcus carried his briefcase like it contained explosives. In a way it did. The evidence inside could destroy reputations, end careers, and send people to prison. His hands were sweaty, despite the cool air conditioning. Rebecca Chen was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. Her office walls were covered with newspaper clippings from famous cases she had won. Politicians, business executives, and celebrities had all fallen to her legal skills. "Mr. Thompson," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "please, sit down and tell me everything." For the next 3 hours, Marcus laid out his case. He played the audio recordings, showed photographs of suspicious documents, and explained the complex web of financial transfers he had discovered. Rebecca listened without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad. When Marcus finished, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and studied him carefully. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "If what you're telling me is true, we're looking at one of the largest charity fraud cases in British history. But Mr. Thompson, you understand what you're up against? The royal family has unlimited resources. They have the best lawyers money can buy. They have political connections that reach the highest levels of government." Marcus nodded. "I know. But I can't let them keep stealing from sick children and homeless animals. It's wrong." Rebecca smiled for the first time. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. I'm talking about a £100 million lawsuit, full public disclosure, media coverage, parliamentary investigations, the works." Marcus felt dizzy. £100 million was more money than he could imagine. "Is that realistic?" "Based on your evidence, it's conservative," Rebecca said. "But Mr. Thompson, before we proceed, I need you to understand something. Once we file this lawsuit, your life will change forever. The media will follow you everywhere. Your family will be under constant scrutiny. You'll probably lose your job immediately. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus thought about Emma and Sarah. He thought about the sick children who needed charity money for medical treatment. He thought about the homeless people who depended on charity kitchens for their next meal. "Yes," he said. "I'm prepared." Rebecca began working immediately. She assembled a team of investigators, accountants, and legal researchers. Within days, they had confirmed much of Marcus's evidence and discovered even more corruption than he had suspected. The charity fraud went back 5 years. Multiple organizations were involved. Money had been stolen not just by Camilla, but by several other royal staff members who had followed her lead. The total amount was staggering. Meanwhile, Marcus continued working at the palace, pretending everything was normal. It was the hardest acting job of his life. Every morning he put on his uniform and stood guard outside the offices of people he was about to sue for massive amounts of money. Camilla seemed unaware that anything had changed. She continued her daily routine of meetings, phone calls, and charity events. The irony was painful for Marcus to watch. She would attend fundraising dinners, making speeches about helping the less fortunate, while millions of pounds meant for those same people sat in her private accounts. 1 week before the lawsuit was scheduled to be filed, Marcus had a close call that nearly exposed everything. He was standing outside Camilla's office when her personal secretary came rushing out. "Marcus," the secretary said urgently, "Her Royal Highness needs to see you immediately." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Had they discovered his investigation? Did they know about the lawsuit? He followed the secretary into Camilla's office, trying to keep his expression neutral. Camilla was sitting behind her desk, looking serious but not angry. Relief flooded through Marcus when he realized this wasn't about his investigation. "Marcus," Camilla said, "I have a special assignment for you. Next week I'm hosting a private meeting with some international charity directors. Very sensitive discussions about future funding. I need you to personally ensure that no one disturbs us. No interruptions, no visitors, no phone calls. Can I count on you?" Marcus nodded professionally. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Complete privacy." After leaving her office, Marcus immediately called Rebecca Chen. The timing was perfect. Camilla's sensitive meeting was clearly another planning session for moving stolen money. If they filed the lawsuit before that meeting, they could prevent millions more pounds from disappearing. "We move tomorrow," Rebecca decided. "I'll file the papers first thing in the morning. By noon, this will be front-page news across the country." That evening, Marcus went home and told Sarah what was about to happen. They sat Emma down and explained that their lives were going to change dramatically. Emma was old enough to understand that her father was doing something important and brave, even if she couldn't grasp all the details. "Will Daddy go to jail?" Emma asked innocently. "No, sweetheart," Sarah said, hugging her tight. "Daddy is one of the good guys. He's helping people who can't help themselves." Marcus barely slept that night. He kept checking his phone, expecting angry calls from palace security or threatening messages from royal lawyers. But everything remained quiet until morning. At 8:00 sharp, Rebecca Chen walked into the High Court in London and filed a lawsuit that would shake the British establishment to its core. The legal papers accused Camilla and several palace staff members of stealing over £100 million from registered charities. The lawsuit demanded full repayment plus damages and called for criminal investigations. Marcus was at his post in the palace when the news broke. He watched Camilla's secretary rushing in and out of her office making frantic phone calls. Within an hour, palace lawyers were arriving for emergency meetings. The controlled, quiet atmosphere of the royal household dissolved into barely controlled panic. At 10:30, Camilla herself emerged from her office. She looked directly at Marcus, and for a moment their eyes met. Her expression was cold and calculating, but Marcus thought he detected something else underneath. "Fear." "Marcus," she said quietly, "I won't be needing security today. You're dismissed." As Marcus walked away from his post for the last time, he felt a mixture of relief and terror. After 15 years of loyal service, his career was over. But his real work was just beginning. The lawsuit had been filed. The evidence was public. Now came the hardest part of all, proving his case against the most powerful family in Britain. By lunchtime, the story had exploded across every newspaper and television channel in Britain. "Royal Guard sues Camilla for £100 charity fraud," screamed the headlines. Marcus's photograph appeared on front pages next to pictures of the Queen consort. creating a David versus Goliath image that captured the public imagination. Marcus had expected media attention, but nothing could have prepared him for the intensity. Reporters camped outside his flat, following him to the grocery store and shouting questions whenever he appeared. Photographers with long lenses positioned themselves across the street, taking pictures through his windows. Sarah lost her job within 24 hours. Her employer, a financial services company that did business with several royal charities, decided they couldn't afford to be associated with the scandal. Emma's school was surrounded by journalists trying to get comments from other parents about the royal guard's daughter. The family was forced to move in with Sarah's parents in a small town outside London. Even there, they weren't completely safe from media attention, but at least Emma could walk to school without being photographed. Meanwhile, Rebecca Chen was fighting the legal battle of her lifetime. The royal family had hired Thornfield, Barnes & Associates, the most expensive law firm in London. Their strategy was simple: destroy Marcus's credibility and claim that any evidence he had gathered was obtained illegally. The royal lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to get the case dismissed on technical grounds. They argued that Marcus had violated his employment contract by recording conversations. They claimed he was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge for being passed over for promotion. They even suggested he had mental health problems that made his testimony unreliable. Rebecca fought back with equal determination. She filed counter motions demanding access to royal financial records. She subpoenaed bank statements, charity documents, and internal communications. She lined up expert witnesses who could explain the complex financial transactions that had moved millions of pounds into private accounts. The legal battle became a daily soap opera for the British public. Every court filing was analyzed on television talk shows. Newspaper columnists took sides, some supporting Marcus as a heroic whistleblower, others condemning him as a traitor to the crown. Public opinion was divided but passionate. Charity organizations across the country issued statements supporting Marcus's lawsuit. The directors of children's hospitals, animal shelters, and environmental groups came forward with their own suspicions about missing funds. "We've been asking questions about our donations for months," said Dr. Patricia Williams, who ran a children's cancer charity. "Every time we requested detailed financial reports, we were told the information was confidential for security reasons. Now we know why." But the royal family also had supporters. Politicians from both major parties issued statements defending Camilla's character and suggesting that Marcus's allegations were politically motivated. Several prominent business leaders published open letters questioning why anyone should believe a security guard over the Queen Consort. The pressure on Marcus's family became unbearable. Emma was bullied at her new school by children who called her father a liar and a traitor. Sarah developed stress-related health problems and had to start taking medication to sleep. Marcus himself lost weight and developed a nervous habit of checking over his shoulder wherever he went. 3 weeks after filing the lawsuit, Marcus received his first direct threat. A handwritten note appeared under the windshield wiper of his car. "Drop the case or your family will pay the price." The message was typed on plain paper with no signature, but the implication was clear. Marcus took the note to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more specific evidence of who had written it. They increased patrols around Sarah's parents' house and advised the family to vary their daily routines. Rebecca Chen hired a private security firm to protect Marcus and his family. The guards were professionals who had worked for politicians and business executives facing serious threats. Their presence was both reassuring and terrifying, a constant reminder that powerful people wanted to stop the lawsuit by any means necessary. The first major breakthrough came from an unexpected source. James Morrison, Camilla's former personal secretary, contacted Rebecca's office through an intermediary. Morrison had been dismissed from royal service 6 months earlier, for reasons that were never made public. Now he wanted to tell his story. Morrison revealed that he had been fired for asking too many questions about charity finances. He had discovered irregularities in several accounts and tried to bring them to Camilla's attention. Instead of investigating his concerns, she had him removed from his position and forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. "I was told to keep quiet or face legal action," Morrison explained to Rebecca. "But when I saw Mr. Thompson's lawsuit, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Too much money is missing. Too many people are being hurt. Morrison provided internal emails and financial documents that supported much of Marcus's evidence. He also revealed the names of other palace staff members who had been involved in the fraud or who had knowledge of the missing funds. With Morrison's testimony, Rebecca felt confident enough to request a preliminary hearing. She wanted a judge to review the evidence and decide whether the case had enough merit to proceed to trial. The hearing was scheduled for a cold Thursday morning in November. Marcus wore his best suit and tried to project confidence as he walked up the courthouse steps, surrounded by security guards and photographers. This was his first public appearance since the lawsuit was filed, and every major news organization in Europe had sent reporters to cover the story. Inside the courtroom, the contrast between the two legal teams was striking. Rebecca and her small group of assistants sat at one table with boxes of evidence and stacks of documents. Across from them, 12 lawyers from Thornfield, Barnes and Associates occupied 3 tables, their expensive suits and confident manner projecting wealth and power. Judge Margaret Harrison was known for her fairness and her refusal to be influenced by political pressure. She had handled several high-profile corruption cases and had a reputation for asking tough questions of both sides. The royal lawyers spoke first, arguing that Marcus's case was based on illegally obtained evidence and should be dismissed immediately. Their lead attorney, Sir William Thornfield himself, spoke with the polished confidence of someone who had never lost a case involving the royal family. "Your Honor," Sir William said, "this is nothing more than a disgruntled employee's attempt to destroy the reputation of our beloved Queen Consort. Mr. Thompson violated his oath of service, broke numerous laws regarding privacy and confidentiality, and is now trying to profit from his betrayal." When Rebecca stood to respond, the courtroom fell completely silent. This was the moment that would determine whether the case would proceed or die before it truly began. "Your Honor," Rebecca said clearly, "this case is not about employment disputes or personal grievances. This case is about £100 million stolen from sick children, homeless families, and endangered animals. The evidence we will present shows a systematic pattern of fraud that has been operating for years under the cover of royal privilege." Judge Harrison listened carefully to both sides, asking pointed questions about the evidence and the legal procedures involved. She seemed particularly interested in the audio recordings Marcus had made and whether they would be admissible in court. After 3 hours of arguments, Judge Harrison called for a recess. Marcus sat in the hallway with Rebecca, watching royal lawyers huddled together in urgent conversation. The next few minutes would determine everything. When Judge Harrison returned to the courtroom, her expression was serious but unreadable. Marcus felt his heart pounding as she shuffled through her notes and looked out at the packed courtroom. Reporters held their pens ready, lawyers leaned forward in anticipation, and security guards positioned themselves near the exits in case of disruption. After careful consideration of the arguments presented today, Judge Harrison began, "I find that the plaintiff has presented sufficient evidence to warrant a full trial. This case will proceed to discovery phase immediately, with a trial date to be set within 6 months." The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Royal lawyers looked stunned, clearly having expected an easy dismissal. Rebecca squeezed Marcus's arm with quiet satisfaction, while across the room, Sir William Thornfield was already on his phone, presumably delivering bad news to very important people. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca held a brief press conference while Marcus stood silently beside her. The questions came rapidly from dozens of reporters shouting over each other. "Ms. Chen, what do you say to critics who claim Mr. Thompson is simply seeking money and fame? This lawsuit seeks the return of stolen charity funds to their rightful purpose," Rebecca responded firmly. "Mr. Thompson isn't asking for a penny for himself. Every pound we recover will go back to the charities that were robbed." "Mr. Thompson," a reporter called out, "do you have any regrets about taking on the royal family?" Marcus stepped forward to the microphone. This was the first time he had spoken publicly since filing the lawsuit. His voice was quiet but steady. "I regret that sick children have suffered while millions of pounds sat in private bank accounts. I regret that homeless people went hungry while charity money paid for luxury vacations. I don't regret trying to stop it." The impact of Judge Harrison's decision rippled far beyond the courthouse. Within hours, Parliament announced it would launch its own investigation into royal charity finances. The Charity Commission, the government body that oversees charitable organizations, issued a statement promising thorough scrutiny of all royal-affiliated charities. Several major donors announced they were suspending contributions to royal charities until the allegations were resolved. Corporate sponsors began quietly distancing themselves from events associated with Camilla. The scandal was becoming a financial disaster for the entire royal establishment, but the royal family wasn't giving up without a fight. Within days of the court decision, a coordinated campaign began to destroy Marcus's reputation. Tabloid newspapers published stories about his financial troubles, his marriage problems, and his obsession with the royal family. Anonymous sources claimed Marcus had gambling debts and had been stealing small amounts from palace petty cash funds. Former colleagues were quoted saying he had always been resentful and ambitious, unsuited for royal service. Even his military record was questioned, with suggestions that he had been disciplined for insubordination years before joining palace security. None of these stories were true, but they didn't need to be. The goal was to make the public question Marcus's motives and credibility. If he could be portrayed as a dishonest opportunist rather than a principled whistleblower, the lawsuit would lose public support. The attacks on Marcus's character were coordinated with a broader strategy to minimize the scandal's impact on the royal family. Palace sources began leaking stories suggesting that Camilla had been misled by corrupt advisors, that she was a victim rather than a perpetrator. Other stories claimed the missing money was the result of accounting errors rather than deliberate theft. Rebecca anticipated these tactics and prepared countermeasures. She hired a public relations firm that specialized in protecting whistleblowers from character assassination. They worked to get Marcus's real story into sympathetic media outlets, arranging interviews with journalists who would focus on the evidence rather than personal attacks. The discovery phase of the lawsuit began in earnest. Rebecca's team was granted access to royal financial records going back 7 years. What they found exceeded even Marcus's worst suspicions. The charity fraud was more extensive and sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Multiple shell companies had been created to hide the movement of funds. Fake invoices had been generated for services that were never provided. Charity events had been organized, where ticket sales went into the wrong accounts, while the stated beneficiaries received only token amounts. The paper trail revealed a network of corruption that included not just Camilla and her immediate staff, but also bank officials, accountants, and charity administrators. Some participants seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Others appeared to have been manipulated into cooperation without understanding the full scope of the fraud. One particularly damaging discovery involved a children's hospital that had been promised a new cancer treatment wing. The charity had raised £12 million specifically for this project, with major donors believing their money would save young lives. Instead, the money had been diverted to purchase artwork and antiques for private royal residences. The hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, broke down in tears when Rebecca's investigators told her what had happened to the donations. "We've been waiting 2 years for that money," Dr. Mitchell said. "We have children who could be treated if we had the proper facilities. Some of them have died waiting. And you're telling me the money was spent on paintings?" Marcus found these discoveries almost unbearable. Each new piece of evidence represented real people who had been hurt by the theft. Children who had suffered without proper medical treatment, animals that had died in inadequate shelters, environmental projects that had been canceled for lack of funds. The emotional toll on Marcus's family continued to mount. Emma was seeing a counselor to help her deal with the stress and attention. Sarah had developed an anxiety disorder that made it difficult for her to leave the house. Marcus himself was taking prescription medication to help him sleep. But support was also growing. Charity workers from across Britain began contacting Rebecca's office with their own evidence of suspicious financial activities. Donors who had contributed large amounts to royal charities came forward demanding investigations into how their money had been used. A group of prominent business people formed a committee to support Marcus's lawsuit financially. They paid for additional investigators and expert witnesses, ensuring that Rebecca's team could match the resources being deployed by the royal family's lawyers. International media attention was also intensifying. News organizations from America, Canada, Australia, and other Commonwealth countries sent reporters to cover the story. The scandal was damaging Britain's reputation worldwide. and putting pressure on other royal families to audit their own charitable activities. 6 weeks into the discovery phase, Rebecca received a phone call that changed everything. A senior accountant at the Bank of England wanted to meet secretly to discuss irregularities in royal financial transactions that his institution had processed. The accountant, whose identity Rebecca agreed to protect, provided evidence that millions of pounds had been transferred to banks in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and other countries known for financial secrecy. These transfers had been disguised as legitimate payments to international charities, but the money had actually gone into numbered accounts controlled by shell companies. "We should have questioned these transactions years ago," the accountant admitted, "but they came with royal authorization, and frankly, no one wanted to be the person who challenged the Queen Consort's financial affairs." This new evidence suggested that the theft was even larger than the £100 million claimed in the lawsuit. It also indicated that much of the stolen money had been moved beyond the reach of British courts, making recovery much more difficult. Rebecca realized she needed to act quickly before more money disappeared offshore. She filed an emergency motion requesting that all royal financial accounts be frozen, pending the outcome of the trial. The motion was scheduled for an urgent hearing the following week. If successful, it would prevent any further movement of funds and preserve whatever money remained in British accounts. If unsuccessful, the evidence suggested that millions more pounds would vanish into foreign bank accounts within days. The emergency hearing took place on a gray Monday morning in December. Snow had fallen overnight, covering London in a blanket of white that seemed to muffle the noise of the city. Despite the early hour and difficult weather, the courthouse was packed with reporters, legal observers, and members of the public who had been following the case. Marcus sat in the front row, wearing the same dark suit he had worn to every court appearance. The stress of the past month showed in his face. He had lost weight and there were dark circles under his eyes. But his posture remained straight, a reminder of his years of military and royal service. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom precisely at 9 o'clock. She had clearly spent the weekend reviewing Rebecca's emergency motion and the opposing arguments filed by the royal lawyers. The stack of documents on her desk suggested this would not be a quick decision. Rebecca stood to address the court first. She had prepared extensively for this moment, knowing that the outcome would largely determine whether the stolen money could ever be recovered. "Your Honor," Rebecca began, "we have evidence of ongoing financial transfers that threaten to place stolen charity funds permanently beyond the reach of justice. In the past week alone, our investigators have documented the movement of £8 million to offshore accounts. Without immediate intervention, the victims of this fraud may never see their money returned." She presented bank records showing a pattern of large transfers occurring just days after each major court ruling in the case. The timing suggested a deliberate effort to move money in response to legal pressure. Rebecca also provided testimony from bank officials who confirmed that additional transfers were scheduled for the coming days. Sir William Thornfield rose to respond for the royal family. His strategy was to portray the emergency motion as a publicity stunt designed to damage his client's reputation rather than a legitimate legal proceeding. "Your Honor," Sir William said smoothly, "the plaintiff is asking this court to freeze the lawful financial activities of Her Royal Highness based on speculation and conspiracy theories. The transactions in question are legitimate business activities that have nothing to do with the baseless allegations in this lawsuit." He argued that freezing royal accounts would cause enormous disruption to legitimate charitable work and might even compromise national security by interfering with official royal duties. The suggestion that charity money was being stolen, he insisted, remained unproven and was likely false. Judge Harrison listened carefully to both arguments, occasionally asking pointed questions about the evidence and the legal precedents involved. She seemed particularly interested in the bank records that showed the timing of the offshore transfers. "Mr. Thornfield," she said at one point, "can you explain why these large transfers began occurring only after this lawsuit was filed? What legitimate business purpose would require moving millions of pounds offshore in such a compressed time frame?" Sir William struggled to provide a convincing answer. He suggested that the transfers were related to international charity work that had been planned for months, but he couldn't produce documentation to support this claim. After 2 hours of arguments, Judge Harrison called for a lunch recess. During the break, Marcus noticed intense activity among the royal legal team. Phone calls were made, documents were hastily reviewed, and several lawyers appeared to be receiving urgent instructions from unseen superiors. When court resumed, Judge Harrison delivered her decision with characteristic directness. The evidence presented today suggests a real and immediate risk that funds central to this lawsuit are being moved beyond the jurisdiction of this court. While I make no finding at this time regarding the ultimate merits of the plaintiff's claims, I cannot ignore the suspicious timing and nature of these financial transfers. She ordered that all royal accounts containing more than £1 million be frozen immediately, pending the outcome of the trial. She also appointed an independent monitor to oversee all royal financial activities and ensure that no additional funds were moved without court approval. The decision sent shockwaves through the royal establishment. Within hours, palace officials were meeting in emergency session to assess the implications. The freeze affected not just Camilla's personal accounts but also the financial operations of several royal charities and official royal activities. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Opinion polls showed that 70% of British citizens supported the judge's decision to freeze the accounts. Charity organizations issued statements praising the court's action and expressing hope that stolen funds would finally be recovered. But the royal family's response was swift and unprecedented. That evening, Buckingham Palace issued an official statement expressing deep concern about the court's interference with royal finances. The statement suggested that the lawsuit was politically motivated and threatened the constitutional role of the monarchy. Within days, the controversy took on an international dimension. The Prime Minister found himself fielding questions from other Commonwealth leaders about the stability of British institutions. Foreign investors expressed concern about the rule of law in a country where even royal finances were subject to court orders. The pressure on the government to intervene became intense. Several prominent conservative politicians called for legislation to protect royal finances from legal challenges. They argued that the monarchy's constitutional role required special protections that ordinary citizens didn't need. But Marcus also gained unexpected support from powerful quarters. A group of former judges published an open letter defending judicial independence and the right of courts to examine anyone's financial affairs when criminal activity was suspected. Several prominent business leaders argued that no one, regardless of their position, should be above the law. The breakthrough that would ultimately decide the case came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, a cleaning woman who worked at one of the banks handling royal transactions, contacted Rebecca's office with information that stunned even experienced investigators. Maria had been working late one evening several weeks earlier when she overheard a heated telephone conversation between a bank manager and someone she later realized was Camilla herself. The conversation was in English, which Maria understood despite being a native Spanish speaker. "I heard her shouting about moving money faster," Maria told Rebecca through a translator. "She kept saying before the courts find out and make sure there's no record." The bankman seemed very nervous and kept saying, "Yes, Your Highness is over and over." More importantly, Maria had found documents in a wastebasket that hadn't been properly shredded. The papers contained account numbers, transfer amounts, and handwritten notes about disguising transactions as charitable donations. Maria had kept the documents thinking they might be important someday. The documents provided the smoking gun that Rebecca had been seeking. They showed in Camilla's own handwriting instructions for moving specific amounts of money to numbered accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. The notes included detailed plans for disguising these transfers as payments to legitimate charities that would never actually receive the funds. One particularly damaging document contained a list of emergency procedures in Camilla's handwriting. The list included instructions to destroy all records, blame computer errors, and transfer remaining funds immediately if discovery appears likely. Rebecca immediately filed these new documents with the court and requested an expedited hearing. The evidence was so compelling that even Sir William Thornfield seemed shaken when he reviewed the materials during a mandatory pre-hearing conference. The handwriting analysis conducted by court-appointed experts confirmed that the documents were genuine and had been written by Camilla herself. The paper was traced to royal stationery, and the ink matched pens found in Camilla's private office. There was no reasonable doubt about the authenticity of the evidence. Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and sadness when he learned about Maria's discovery. The documents proved everything he had suspected and more. But they also confirmed that the person he had spent 15 years protecting had been systematically stealing from the most vulnerable people in society. The media coverage of the new evidence was intense and largely sympathetic to Marcus's case. Editorial writers who had previously questioned his motives now called him a hero. Television commentators analyzed the handwritten documents in detail, expressing shock at the cold calculation revealed in Camilla's notes. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Protests began appearing outside royal residences, with demonstrators carrying signs demanding justice for charity victims. Online petitions calling for criminal prosecution of royal staff members gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures within days. The pressure on Camilla personally became unbearable. Photographers followed her everywhere, shouting questions about the missing charity money. Royal events were disrupted by protesters, and several scheduled appearances had to be canceled for security reasons. 3 days before the next scheduled hearing, something happened that no one had anticipated. James Morrison, the former royal secretary who had provided testimony supporting Marcus's case, was found dead in his London apartment. The initial police report suggested suicide, but the circumstances raised immediate questions. Morrison had been scheduled to provide crucial testimony about the internal workings of the charity fraud scheme. His death occurred just hours before he was supposed to meet with Rebecca's legal team to review his testimony for the upcoming hearing. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, and a note was found that appeared to be in Morrison's handwriting. But several details troubled investigators. Morrison had recently spoken optimistically about the future to friends and family. He had also made dinner plans for the following week and had purchased theater tickets for the weekend. Marcus received the news while at home with his family. The implications were terrifying. If Morrison's death wasn't suicide, it suggested that people involved in the charity fraud were willing to kill to protect their secrets. If it was suicide, it indicated that the pressure of the case was destroying innocent people. Rebecca hired additional security for Marcus and his family immediately. She also requested police protection for other potential witnesses who might be at risk. The case had clearly escalated beyond a civil lawsuit into something much more dangerous. The suspicious timing of Morrison's death created a media firestorm. Conspiracy theories spread across social media, with some people suggesting that the royal family had ordered his murder to prevent damaging testimony. Others argued that he had been driven to suicide by the stress of betraying his former employers. Police announced they would conduct a thorough investigation into Morrison's death, but they also warned against speculation that could interfere with their work. The coroner scheduled an inquest that would examine all the evidence and determine the official cause of death. The tragedy cast a shadow over the next court hearing. Judge Harrison expressed her condolences to Morrison's family and acknowledged that his death had eliminated a key witness for the plaintiff's case. However, she ruled that his previous statements to investigators could still be admitted as evidence since they had been given under oath. Sir William Thornfield attempted to use Morrison's death to argue that the entire case was causing unnecessary trauma and should be dismissed in the interest of preventing further tragedy. He suggested that the stress of the legal proceedings was destroying lives and threatening public order. Rebecca responded by arguing that Morrison's death, whether suicide or something more sinister, only emphasized the importance of exposing the truth about the charity fraud. She pointed out that the victims of the theft had also suffered trauma, and that justice required completing the legal process regardless of the personal costs. Judge Harrison agreed that the case should proceed, but she also ordered additional security measures for all participants. The courthouse would be closed to the public during future hearings, and all witnesses would be provided with protection if they requested it. As the day of the major hearing approached, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since he first heard Camilla discussing charity payments through her office door. He had lost his career, his privacy, and his sense of security. His family had endured months of harassment and stress, but he had also accomplished something important. The frozen bank accounts had already prevented millions of pounds from disappearing offshore. Several charity organizations had received partial repayments from funds that had been recovered. Children's hospitals had been able to restart projects that had been suspended due to missing donations. The upcoming hearing would determine whether the case would go to full trial or be settled out of court. Either way, Marcus knew that his decision to speak out had already changed the way royal charities operated and had given hope to people who had been victimized by corruption at the highest levels of society. The major hearing was scheduled for a cold January morning, exactly 8 months after Marcus had first filed his lawsuit. The media attention had reached fever pitch, with international news crews setting up outside the courthouse before dawn. Police barriers kept crowds of supporters and protesters at a safe distance, but their chants could be heard clearly inside the building. Marcus arrived at the courthouse in an armored car provided by his security team. The death threats had increased dramatically following Morrison's suspicious death, and Rebecca wasn't taking any chances with her client's safety. As Marcus walked up the courthouse steps, photographers captured every angle, creating images that would appear on front pages around the world. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and formal. Judge Harrison had imposed strict rules about behavior and media coverage. No cameras were allowed during proceedings, and anyone who disrupted the hearing would be immediately removed and potentially charged with contempt of court. The royal legal team had been reorganized following several devastating revelations. Sir William Thornfield remained as lead counsel, but he was now supported by specialists in criminal law and international finance. The presence of criminal lawyers suggested that the royal family was preparing for the possibility of prosecution beyond the civil lawsuit. Rebecca had also expanded her team. The complexity of tracing stolen funds across multiple countries and financial institutions required experts in international law and forensic accounting. She had also retained a specialist in witness protection, reflecting the ongoing concerns about safety following Morrison's death. Judge Harrison began the proceedings by addressing the elephant in the room. "Before we proceed with arguments regarding the merits of this case," she said, "I want to acknowledge the tragic death of Mr. James Morrison. While the investigation into his death continues, we must not allow speculation or fear to interfere with the administration of justice." She announced new security protocols for all participants and made it clear that any attempts to intimidate witnesses or interfere with the legal process would result in criminal charges. The message was directed at both sides, but everyone understood it was primarily meant to protect Marcus and other potential witnesses. Rebecca began her presentation with a comprehensive overview of the evidence that had been gathered over 8 months of investigation. Using charts and financial records, she traced the movement of stolen funds from charity accounts to private royal accounts and eventually to offshore banks. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Rebecca's team had documented the theft of over £120 million from 47 different charities over a period of 5 years. The money had been stolen through a variety of methods, from simple transfer authorization fraud to complex shell company schemes. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, presenting a particularly damaging piece of evidence, "this document shows instructions written in the defendant's own handwriting for moving £12 million that had been donated specifically for children's cancer research. The money was instead used to purchase artwork and luxury goods for private royal residences." She displayed photographs of the artwork in question, including paintings and sculptures that had been purchased with charity funds and were now hanging in Camilla's private apartments. The visual impact was powerful. Sick children had been denied medical treatment so that the Queen Consort could decorate her homes with expensive art. The testimony of Maria Santos, the cleaning woman who had discovered the incriminating documents, was delivered via secure video link from an undisclosed location. Her safety had become a major concern after Morrison's death, and she had been moved to a safe house with her family. Maria's testimony was straightforward and devastating. She described finding the handwritten documents in detail and explained how she had witnessed suspicious late-night meetings between bank officials and royal representatives. Her account was corroborated by security camera footage that showed these meetings taking place. When Sir William Thornfield rose to cross-examine Maria, his usual confidence seemed diminished. The evidence against his clients was overwhelming, and his questions seemed designed more to create doubt than to establish alternative explanations. "Ms. Santos," Sir William asked, Isn't it true that you were facing deportation proceedings at the time you claimed to have found these documents? Weren't you looking for a way to gain favorable attention from authorities? Maria's response, delivered through her translator, was simple and powerful. I have lived in England for 15 years. I have 3 children who were born here. I found those papers because someone threw them away instead of destroying them properly. I kept them because I knew they were important. I don't care about immigration status. I care about children who need charity money for medicine. The most dramatic moment came when Rebecca called Marcus himself to testify. This was the first time he had spoken under oath about his experiences, and the courtroom was completely silent as he took the witness stand. Marcus's testimony was detailed and emotional. He described his 15 years of loyal service to the royal family and his growing suspicions about financial irregularities. He explained his decision to begin recording conversations and his internal struggle about whether to come forward with evidence. I took an oath to serve and protect, Marcus said quietly. For years I thought that meant protecting the royal family from external threats. It took me too long to realize that sometimes the biggest threat comes from within. He described specific incidents he had witnessed, including meetings where large cash payments were made to silence potential witnesses and conversations where charity directors were threatened with loss of royal patronage if they asked too many questions about missing funds. When Sir William cross-examined Marcus, he focused on the methods used to gather evidence, arguing that secret recordings violated privacy laws and employment contracts. Mr. Thompson, Sir William said sharply, you violated your oath of service, broke numerous laws, and betrayed the trust of people who considered you family. How can this court believe anything you say? Marcus's response was measured but firm. I broke my employment contract to expose theft from children's charities. I violated privacy laws to protect sick people who were being robbed. If that makes me a criminal, then I accept that judgment, but the evidence speaks for itself. The hearing continued for 3 days with testimony from bank officials, charity directors, and forensic accountants. Each witness added more detail to the picture of systematic fraud that had operated under royal protection for years. One of the most compelling witnesses was Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Children's Hospital that had been promised funding for a cancer treatment wing. She testified about the impact of the missing funds on patient care and described specific children who had died while waiting for treatments that could have been provided if the promised money had actually been available. Your Honor, Dr. Mitchell said, fighting back tears, I have to look parents in the eye and tell them we don't have the resources to save their children. Meanwhile, £12 million that was donated specifically for this purpose was spent on paintings and sculptures. How do I explain that to a mother whose child is dying? By the end of the 3 days, the weight of evidence against Camilla and her associates was overwhelming. Even some of the royal supporters in the courtroom seemed shaken by the testimony they had heard. Judge Harrison announced that she would need several days to review all the evidence and legal arguments before making her decision. The delay would give both sides time to prepare for whatever came next, whether that was a full trial, a settlement negotiation, or criminal referrals to prosecutors. As Marcus left the courthouse after his testimony, he was surrounded by supporters who had gathered despite the cold weather. Many were charity workers, hospital staff, and volunteers who had been personally affected by the theft of funds. Thank you for speaking out, said one woman who introduced herself as a nurse at a children's hospital. You've given hope to families who thought no one cared about what happened to their donations. Marcus nodded gratefully but said little. The hardest part of his journey was still ahead. Judge Harrison's decision would determine not just the outcome of his lawsuit, but the future of royal accountability and the possibility of justice for thousands of people who had been victimized by corruption at the highest levels of British society. Judge Harrison's decision came on a Friday afternoon in late January, exactly 9 months after Marcus had first filed his historic lawsuit. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on screens set up in nearby buildings. The tension was almost unbearable as everyone waited to learn whether justice would prevail or power would protect itself once again. Marcus sat in the front row with Rebecca and his security team. Sarah and Emma had chosen to stay home, unable to bear the stress of being present for the verdict. Marcus understood their decision, but he felt alone in what might be the most important moment of his life. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom at exactly 2 o'clock. Her expression revealed nothing as she took her seat and arranged the thick stack of documents containing her written decision. The silence was complete except for the clicking of court reporters' keyboards and the distant sound of crowds outside. In the matter of Thompson versus Her Royal Highness the Queen Consort and others, Judge Harrison began, this court has spent considerable time reviewing extensive evidence of financial impropriety involving charitable funds under royal patronage. She paused, looking directly at Marcus before continuing. The evidence presented by the plaintiff is overwhelming and largely undisputed. Bank records, recorded conversations, handwritten documents, and witness testimony have established a clear pattern of systematic theft from charitable organizations over a period of 5 years. Marcus felt his heart racing as Judge Harrison continued her summary of the findings. The defendants have argued that this case represents an attack on the constitutional role of the monarchy and should be dismissed on grounds of royal privilege. However, this court finds that no person, regardless of their position or title, is above the law when it comes to criminal activity. The judge's voice grew stronger as she reached the core of her decision. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all major counts. The defendants are hereby ordered to repay £137 million in stolen charitable funds, plus interest and damages totaling an additional £43 million. Furthermore, this court is referring evidence of criminal activity to the Crown Prosecution Service for immediate investigation. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause that Judge Harrison made no attempt to quiet. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as Rebecca hugged him tightly. After 9 months of legal battle, threats, and personal sacrifice, justice had finally been served. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. She raised her hand for silence and continued with the most shocking part of her ruling. Additionally, this court finds that the evidence of witness intimidation and possible murder requires immediate action. I am ordering the arrest of Her Royal Highness the Queen Consort and 7 co-conspirators on charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Arrest warrants will be issued immediately. The second eruption of noise was even louder than the first. Sir William Thornfield looked stunned, clearly having expected at worst a financial judgment that could be appealed. The prospect of actual criminal charges against the Queen Consort was unprecedented in modern British history. Within hours, police officers were at royal residences with arrest warrants. The sight of Camilla being led away in handcuffs was broadcast live around the world, creating one of the most shocking images in the history of the British monarchy. The arrests sent shockwaves through the entire royal establishment. King Charles, who had remained publicly silent throughout the lawsuit, was forced to issue a statement expressing his deep shock and disappointment at the charges against his wife. Palace officials worked frantically to distance the monarchy from the scandal and preserve what remained of royal credibility. The political implications were enormous. Parliament was forced to convene emergency sessions to address the constitutional crisis created by criminal charges against the Queen Consort. Some politicians called for major reforms to royal finances and oversight. Others demanded a complete review of the monarchy's role in modern Britain. Public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of the court's decision. Opinion polls showed that 85% of British citizens believed the arrests were justified, and that the royal family should be held to the same legal standards as everyone else. Protests that had been critical of the monarchy during the lawsuit now became celebrations of justice and the rule of law. The international response was equally dramatic. Commonwealth countries began reviewing their own royal financial arrangements. Several former colonies used the scandal as justification for moving toward republican forms of government. The idea that the British royal family could be trusted to represent moral authority was severely damaged. For Marcus and his family, the victory was bittersweet. They had achieved everything they had hoped for legally, but the personal cost had been enormous. Emma was still receiving counseling for the trauma of the past year. Sarah had developed chronic health problems from the stress. Marcus himself would never fully recover from the betrayal. He felt it discovering the corruption of people he had served loyally for 15 years. The criminal trials that followed were even more dramatic than the civil lawsuit. Camilla and her co-conspirators faced charges that could result in decades in prison. The evidence presented in criminal court was even more detailed and damaging than what had been revealed in the civil case. Additional witnesses came forward during the criminal proceedings, including several charity directors who had been threatened into silence and bank officials who had been coerced into processing illegal transactions. The full scope of the corruption was revealed to be even larger than Judge Harrison had found in the civil case. Camilla's defense team attempted to argue that she had been manipulated by advisors and hadn't understood the nature of the financial transactions she was authorizing. However, the handwritten documents discovered by Maria Santos made this defense impossible to sustain. The evidence clearly showed that Camilla had been the primary architect of the fraud scheme. The trial lasted 4 months and ended with guilty verdicts on all major charges. Camilla was sentenced to 12 years in prison, the longest sentence ever imposed on a member of the British royal family. Her co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years. The stolen money was recovered much more quickly than anyone had expected. Swiss and Cayman Islands banks, facing international pressure and criminal investigations of their own, cooperated fully with asset recovery efforts. Within 18 months of Judge Harrison's initial ruling, over 90% of the stolen funds had been returned to their rightful charitable purposes. The children's hospital that had been promised funding for a cancer treatment wing finally received its money and was able to complete the project. The wing was named the James Morrison Memorial Cancer Center in honor of the royal secretary whose death had highlighted the dangers faced by those who spoke out against corruption. Marcus never returned to royal service. The experience had fundamentally changed his view of power and authority. Instead, he became an advocate for whistleblower protection and institutional transparency. He established a foundation that provided legal and financial support for people who risked their careers and safety to expose corruption. 3 years after filing his lawsuit, Marcus was awarded the Order of Merit by Parliament for his service to justice and transparency. The ceremony was attended by representatives from dozens of charities that had benefited from the recovery of stolen funds. In his acceptance speech, Marcus reflected on the lessons of his experience. "I learned that loyalty to institutions must never override loyalty to principles," he said. "When we see wrongdoing, especially by those in positions of trust and authority, we have a moral obligation to speak out. The cost of silence is always higher than the cost of truth." The royal family never fully recovered from the scandal. King Charles implemented major reforms to royal financial oversight and transparency, but public trust in the monarchy remained damaged. Several Commonwealth countries did eventually become republics, citing the charity fraud scandal as evidence that hereditary monarchy was incompatible with modern democratic values. For Marcus, the most meaningful outcome wasn't the legal victory or the public recognition. It was the knowledge that hundreds of thousands of vulnerable people, sick children, homeless families, endangered animals, would receive the help they needed because someone had finally held powerful thieves accountable for their crimes. On quiet evenings at home with Sarah and Emma, Marcus sometimes reflected on the moment when he first heard Camilla discussing charity payments through her office door. The decision to act on what he heard had cost him everything he thought he valued. But it had also given him something far more important, the knowledge that when justice and power came into conflict, he had chosen justice. The final irony wasn't lost on him. For 15 years, he had protected the royal family from external threats. In the end, the most important thing he had ever done for his country was protecting it from the royal family itself.